Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Panelino Bambino tier list. Today we're going to be looking at Fire Emblem 6, the last of the GBA games. If you don't know, or if you didn't see, I did tier lists for Fire Emblem 7 and Fire Emblem 8, so if you're interested in that, obviously go check those out. But today we're going to be doing Fire Emblem 6. I had planned to do this earlier, but I'm re-recording it. My last one was not exactly what I wanted, so hopefully this will go better. So a little bit about Fire Emblem 6 and our tier list here. We're going to be doing this in referencing Iron Man's, as we always do for our tier list. So efficiency is key, strong units, base stats, those sorts of things. Fire Emblem 6 specifically, this is probably my favorite of the GBA games to run. I think Sacred Stones is maybe a little easy and short, and 7 has the deployable unit restrictions, and it's pretty short. This game is really long. There's a ton of room to train characters. There's a lot of different characters, as you can see, which is part of the reason I don't want there to be a huge intro here, hugely long, because this video is probably going to take a little bit. So, yeah, without further ado, I'll be mentioning some other things as I go. Fire Emblem 6 is like harder than the other GBA games. The hit rates are terrible, some different things, but we'll talk about those as we go. So let's just start right off the bat in S tier. For me, S tier, and I've explained this in my other tier list, but it's the best units in the game. If you're not using these units, it's because you're trying to meme or do something else. These units are amazing. They're used on all my playthroughs, unless, again, I'm memeing. So yeah, these are the best of the best. And we're going to be starting with a character who I cannot find. Marcus is going to be the character we're talking about. Am I blind? I seem blind, don't I? Aha! There's my boy. Okay, so if you've seen my Fire Emblem 7 tier list, this should look really familiar. And Marcus is a bit different than he is in Fire Emblem 7. He's much more of a traditional Jagan. So we've talked about Marcus and Seth, which are more sort of new age, if you want to call it that, Jagans. Obviously, Marcus is kind of, from Fire Emblem 7, is sort of middle ground of that. Seth has amazing bases, amazing throughout the entire game. Marcus, only about half the game. This Marcus, his bases are not going to look that strong. He's a lot stronger than the old school Jagans. But it's not his individual strength or his longevity that makes him so darn good. What makes him so good is how hard early Fire Emblem 6 is on a hard mode. Enemies are incredibly difficult. There are two specific chapters. The first being, I believe it's chapter 3. It's the one where you fight Eric, which has some really difficult cavaliers that are really, really hard to kill. I mean, these guys have like close to 10 speed, 30 HP, like close to 10 defense, might be a little lower than that, but Marcus and his Silver Lance are like basically your only options as far as being able to kill them in any kind of timely manner, or really at all, to be honest. And then chapter 7, which is the hardest chapter in the game, in my opinion, and he's really useful for that chapter, but he's useful for all the other ones, obviously, early on as well, just those are the most difficult. But yeah, for me, like, yes, Marcus does fall off after chapter 7. He can still be useful on the Western Isles, but a lot of your other units are going to be taking over from him from there. And you might not think that 7 chapters of, I want to say dominance, but it's not even really that, just being really useful. Why would he be the best character in the game, especially considering, a few of the characters that are to come? But it's really just because of how important he is. Like, yes, Marcus is amazing in Fire Emblem 7, and yes, both Marcus and, of course, Seth are better characters, but you don't need Seth for Sacred Stones. And, well, Marcus is really important for Fire Emblem 7 as well. I'm not arguing that, but the point is that, like, he is just so important. There is no other character in this game that is as necessary as Marcus. You could cut every other character, not all together, of course, but cut them all individually, and you would be able to complete the game, whereas Marcus is just so important. So yeah, I am at the top of S just because of that, because I think he's so important to actual playthroughs, to just getting them done. And then second, we have Milady. So these two are kind of like on other ends of the spectrum. Milady is a just completely broken character. She's an insane class in Wyvern Lord and Wyvern Knight, or Wyvern Rider, or whatever it's called. That means she has amazing movement, she gets to use lances, all that good stuff. She comes with insane bases. You can promote her immediately, or wait. Oh, sorry. I hope that didn't go through. Her growths are also insane. She's recruited early enough to not be, like, too late. She's amazing. So she's kind of the other end of the spectrum, and you can maybe flip these. Again, the reason I have Marcus at number 1 and her number 2 is just because of how important Marcus is. Milady isn't important. Yes, she does make the game way easier when you use her, and she is insanely strong. but she's not crucial to you actually being able to finish the game. But everything else she's amazing at. She will absolutely just dumpster the game after she's recruited. You also get a Delphi shield fairly early in this game, and yeah, her with the Delphi shield, she just has nothing to worry about. She's so strong. So easy number 2. Next up, we're going to be putting our dancers. Well, I guess he's not a dancer, he's a bard, but there's not really anything unique about these two characters in this game. Dancers are always great, so obviously I'm always going to be putting them in S tier. They don't have anything special to them, they're awesome, and dancers are awesome, so. Alright, next up we have Rutger. So I made a whole video kind of detailing why Rutger is so good and the other Myrmidons and GBA games are not. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to check that out. But yeah, Rutger's amazing. He's very similar to Joshua and Guy, so you might be wondering why Rutger is so darn good. And there's a few reasons. Again, I detailed them in that video, but I'm just going to go over a couple. Weapons, specifically swords, are not as bad as they are in the other GBA games because hit rates are really bad, and 1-2 range isn't as important, so the fact that he doesn't get to use that isn't as big a deal. Also, he's really, really strong, and he gets a really nice sort of power spike around the Western Isles. And even though the Western Isles are fairly easy, it is still really, really useful to have access to Rutger, especially for killing bosses during this time. It can be really tedious to do if you don't have Rutger's killing edge to just annihilate an enemy. And also, a lot of Swordmaster's issues in stats come from the fact that they have so much speed and skill, but at some point it's not useful anymore. Because, once you can double an enemy, it doesn't matter if you have 5 more speed, you're still just doubling. But in this game, again, hit is really important so that skill doesn't go to waste. And the speed stat is also much more useful because enemy speed goes way higher than it does in the other two GBA games. So those are just a few of the reasons that Rutger's so good. But yeah, he also, just like Guy and Joshua, he comes with strong stats, can immediately be used in combat, especially with his killing edge, can immediately do killing. But again, early game Fire Emblem 6 much more difficult than 7 or 8, and so his sort of increased stats as opposed to like your calves and stuff is more useful even in that regard too. So there's a lot of reasons that Rutger is stronger than those two, and a lot of reasons that he is as strong as he is, which I do believe he's strong because he's the 5th, I guess, but really like 3rd best unit in this game. And then the last unit I'm going to put in S tier is Percival. So one of the things about this game that's really important, and I didn't mention this even though I probably should have, because all 3 of these characters get big boosts from it, is hard mode bonuses. So hard mode bonuses are basically stat bonuses that are given by giving extra levels but not actually increasing their level to certain units that start off as enemies. So the game views, let's say, Rutger as an enemy because he starts as an enemy, so it gives him 5 additional levels or something along those lines. So he's not actually level 9 as opposed to level 4 or whatever level he comes at, he just has those increased stats. So Milady gets this, Rutger gets this, and Percival gets this. And it's really important for all 3 characters. And not much of a surprise that most of S is dominated by hard mode bonuses because they're really strong. Percival comes just a bit later than Milady. He's a paladin, which is an amazing class, but really his bases are just ridiculous. He has like 50 HP, 20 strength, 20 speed, like 15 defense, somewhere in the teens resistance, something like that. These are just really strong stats. Now, it is important to note that Fire Emblem 6, as I said, it scales much higher than the other two GBA games, so while Percival and the stats I just mentioned would be pretty much just busted throughout the entirety of 7 and 8, he does eventually kind of hit a wall, but obviously you're also gaining him levels, so he will get a bit stronger, even though his growths aren't particularly strong, but he's just so strong immediately. To get that pile of stats and to require nothing of you is just so good. So it's really hard to put Percival anywhere except for S. There's really no reason to ever not use Percival. He's just so strong. So that's my whole S tier. I don't think anyone else really belongs up here. I think, like I said, Marcus for the reasons I highlighted, and then just the base stats along with how easy it is to train all 3 of these. They're just so strong. So moving down to A, I think everyone in A has like slight problems. They require a little bit of you, or they're recruited a bit late, but they're all really, really useful. So we'll start with Nime. Nime I almost put an S. I just think she's recruited a bit late and has a little bit wrong with her, but I really like Nime. She is a druid that comes with just really strong stats, also a really strong staff rank, along with really, really high magic. So she can actually use these things like Berserk or Sleep or Silence, where some of your other staff users, like Saul, for example, probably won't, or at least not as strong as her. She can also do stuff like use Nosferatu, which can allow her to sort of stall as long as she can take a hit. She's incredibly frail, so in order to do basically any combat with her, you're going to want to get her at least some kind of Seraph Robe. Or is it called Angelic Robe? I think it's Angelic Robe in Final 6. So that is kind of her negatives, but she's just so useful with her staff rank and the ability to immediately use dark magic. And the other two dark magic users in this game suck, so it's pretty easy to get her, all the dark magic that you would otherwise not be using. You don't really have to buy her anything extra. And yeah, that staff rank along with that magic is just good enough, I think, to be the top A. It's so strong. Only problem is, again, she's recruited a bit late, which is a little unfortunate. The next up I have the character I just mentioned, which is Saul, who is somewhere here. This is the downside of not just starting with all the characters. Here he is. Here's our boy. So Saul, I'm also going to just put... So like I've done it in a lot of my other tier lists, I have a lot of units that are just kind of paired with each other because it's hard for me to put them anywhere else. Both Saul and Clarion are amazing, and they're also recruited really early in the game. So I do think that Saul is a better unit because he has a bit stronger magic. I think his base weapon level is a bit higher, and he's more bulky. But Clarion obviously has the better movement, so it's kind of up to you. Either way, they're both amazing characters. So like I said, Clarion's a Troubadour, so she has a bit better movement. Saul is just a priest, but yeah, not a ton to talk about with them. They're early healers, and yeah, I think they're amazing. So I have them in A tier. Staffs in this game are not except when we're not talking about Thracia level. You need restore users and stuff, and obviously they're good for that. There is a decent amount of access to like Physic, which is really nice, and some status staves. So Saul's a bit better, I think, at using those, but they're both really, really strong units. Okay, next up I have kind of a weird one, and I have Shin. So Shin's a really interesting unit because there's a route split in this game that's determined by four different characters, two on either side, depending on like how many levels or how much experience you give them. And I think sometimes Shin is perhaps in people's minds a bad unit or a worse unit because by training him, you are more likely, or you're going to have to train Pegasus Knights more to not go to Sakai, which people don't want to go to. Now, I've tried to not think about that in my ranking of Shin. I also don't really mind going to Sakai that much. And honestly, if I say just in a vacuum, Shin, don't worry about going to Sakai, I think he's amazing. This is hard mode bonuses, coming back again. He's just so strong immediately. Like, every one of my playthroughs, even if I don't plan on using him, he's just so good right off the bat. He doubles basically everything immediately. He can hit hard. He has like 30 health already, so he can take hits. He has amazing movement because he's a nomad, and then he gets to use swords when he's a nomad trooper. He's also good because if you do train him and have to go to Sakai, you can get away kind of with using bows because there's a lot of obviously nomads and nomad troopers there. Also, something really important about this game, and we'll be talking about this later with some of the other archers and snipers, I guess just the snipers. Bows are actually really strong in this game. So hit rates of weapons really suck, but also, especially in the late game, there's a lot of Wyvern Lords, like a lot of them, and they're really, really strong. So number one, magic is amazing because the resistance sucks, and you can use stuff like Air Caliber and bows because you have effective damage, and your hit rate is really good. So bows in this game, quite a bit better than they are in the other two GBA games, and Shin is a great user of bows. So I really like Shin. We'll talk about this more when I get to like Lu, but I really like these point and click units, as I like to call them. Like, you can click on that unit, and when you're kind of trying to map out a turn, you know that like Shin is good for a kill. Like, his offensive stats are just so good, and you can give him like killer bows and stuff. And hit rate, again, I want to stress how strong hit rate is, because having good hit is so nice in this game. But yeah, the ability to just be like, okay, well, Shin will kill this guy, and then I'll worry about the other guys. So nice. I love Shin. So next up, I'm going to have two characters right next to each other again. We're going to have Lance, and we're going to have Alan. So these are the early calves. I like these two quite a bit. I train both of them on most of my playthroughs. I have them just under Shin, even though they're recruited a bit earlier, just because, again, I love that point and click. And although I think both these units are quite good, Paladin hit rate with like lances, and you can't really use swords as the game progresses, at least as effectively against most units. Like, it won't deal any damage to wyverns, and lances, barring like killer lances, just never really get that good of hit. And so I think they're just a lot worse of a class than Shin. But I do really like them. Paladin is still an amazing class. I have Lance just ahead of Alan, even though I think Alan is a stronger unit as the game progresses. I like that Lance gets to sort of doubling with his speed earlier, and I think that can be really useful, especially for Chapter 7, if you can double consistently by the time you get there. As far as their differences, yeah, it's kind of the traditional. Lance is faster, but Alan has a bit better bulk and better strength, and also is certainly not slow in his own right. But yeah, they're both amazing units. Again, I train them both on basically every playthrough. They're both awesome, so I just think they're a bit worse than Shin, and not as useful as the staff users. And then we're going to have, I guess I'll just throw them both up there, Ellen, and then before Ellen I have Cecilia. So more staff users. Staffs are amazing, as always, in Fire Emblem. Cecilia is a character that's a pre-promote. Her stats offensively are not particularly strong, but that's kind of irrelevant. I do think her staff rank is a bit low, but she's already a Valkyrie, so her movement's amazing, and her base magic I think is like 11, so she can heal decently. It's true as the game progresses, you're going to have to be really careful with her, because she has like 11 speed, and she'll get like one-rounded by most things as I said, the game progresses. But decent magic, that high movement, she'll also recruit relatively early. It's really hard to go wrong with her. Also, she comes with Air Caliber, and like magic deals a lot of damage in this game. And yes, she won't double stuff, but she can actually be used offensively if you need in a pinch. So I really like Cecilia. Obviously, I have her in A. So, and then I have Ellen. I do think Ellen is quite a bit worse than Saul and Clarion, which is why I have her kind of a bit lower. She starts with like 2 magic or something like that, which is just low. She doesn't have the bulk or the magic of Saul, nor does she have the movement of Clarion or the magic of Clarion. So I do think that she's worse, but I don't think that should like make her not be an A. I still think she's amazing. If those two survive, obviously I don't think you're going to wind up using Ellen, especially if Cecilia survives too. But if any of them die, Ellen can be really nice to put in their place. So I really like Ellen, and so I have her in A. Okay, rounding out A, we have the other character I mentioned is the sort of point-and-click character, which is Lou. So I really like Lou. If you watch my Fire Emblem 7 and my Fire Emblem 8 tier list, you know that, and 7 especially, but I'm not the biggest fan, right? I don't love the sort of early game magic users that much in the GBA games. In this one, I do, quite a bit. And I mentioned why earlier. Hit rates of magic, really strong. And the ability to hit Wyverns hard in the late game, incredibly good. You can also, of course, heal. As far as Lou specifically, he's more in the Urk camp than the Loot camp. By that I mean that he's really fast, but his bulk is, questionable, as all sages are, and his magic isn't the best. But you don't really need that strong of magic, and yeah, he can double very quickly, and with everybody's bad resistance, the magic, again, not that important. He's going to be able to deal a lot of damage. With base fire, I do find that he does struggle to one round even after doubling for a while, but once you get him to a sage, he can definitely do that. And in the late game, you can always look to stuff like Air Caliber or L-Fire to, again, just point-and-click enemies. Lou is so nice. I like him quite a bit. So that's the end of my A tier. Again, I use basically all these characters in every playthrough, barring maybe Ellen, as I said, but I still use her, until I get the other healers, so. Now moving on down to B, we have a character that, honestly, I don't use that often. As far as, like, not Corel, oh my god, not Corel. As far as longevity is concerned, but I do always use for some combat on every playthrough, and that's Deke. So Deke is a character who comes so early and gives you pretty good stats. And the thing is, this is why Marcus is so good. It's really hard to come by decent stats really early in the game, and the enemies are really tough, and Deke gives you that. Yes, his growths aren't the best, and growths very much do matter in this game because of how units scale, but Deke is not a bad hero if you do want to train him, and he's just so useful early on. The ability to take hits, he's got like 30 health, and he'll have some decent damage. I think he has like 8 strength or something at base. He'll fall off fairly quickly, but again, just the ability to take hits is so nice. That's really all you need. The ability to get those early stats. I think Deke and Marcus are the two that are definitely sort of propped up the most by the fact that they give you stats early even though they don't scale very well. But yeah, I like Deke quite a bit. And admittedly, I don't train him very much, so he might be better than I'm giving him credit for as far as scaling into the late game. But So maybe he should even be an A. I don't know. But I don't train him very often. Because I think the problem with Deke 2 is that you always want to use the first Hero's Crest on Rucker, and if you're waiting on Deke, then I don't think you're going to get that power spike that you really want from him, so... But again, still good enough for B in my book, even if you don't use him going forward. Then I have Yodel. Yodel's a weird character. He's got a lot going for him. He's like S-rank stabs. He can do some offensive stuff. Obviously, all the staff stuff is fantastic. He's just recruited really late. I mean, technically only a chapter later than Nime, but I do think that he's worse. He doesn't have that Nosferatu utility as far as offensive ability goes. His magic is also quite a bit worse, and so he's not quite as strong with the like Physic and Berserk and Sounds and that kind of stuff. But he's still really useful. He's just recruited so late. So I have him in B. I think he's a really nice character. But yeah, recruited a bit late. Next up, I have two more characters that I just kind of shoved next to each other, and that's Klein and a Green. So these are snipers. You get Klein quite a bit earlier, but a Green is quite a bit stronger. Again, these are probably the two that get propped up most by bows being really good in this game, and they really are. I use a Green at the very least, and usually a Green and Klein quite a bit as the game progresses, because even in the very end game, like for example the Murdoch chapter, they can still give you really strong combat against wyverns. I mean, they can combine to kill like a wyvern a turn, which doesn't seem that impactful, but trust me, you can, especially in those chapters where you can deploy a million units. And prior to that, they can give you quite a bit of decent combat. When they're both recruited, they're both good for where they're at. So I like these two quite a bit. I think, yeah, just that utility with the wyverns as you progress is so nice. And like I said, they can give you pretty good combat against everything else early on as well when they're both recruited. So next up, I have two as well that I just kind of shoved here, and that's the two first thieves you get, Chad and Astal. I think Astal's better because you use him for long. Once you get him, obviously there's not really a reason to deploy Chad. But I don't think they should be that far apart. They basically serve the same purpose. They're not going to give you any combat, obviously. Although, admittedly, Astal, kind of like Legault in Fire Emblem 7, not too bad of combat for a while after recruitment. So on chapters where you recruit him to open up chests, you actually can have him do some combat. Although, that's not his use, obviously, but it's actually not too bad. But yeah, there's a decent amount of chests and stuff to open throughout the game, so I think they're useful. So I have them in mid-B. Kind of like the dancers, I'm not really sure where to rank these, but there's a decent amount of stuff to open in this game as it seems, so I think it's fair to put them in mid-B. I have the other thief a bit lower, because I think she's quite a bit worse, but yeah, I think these two are good. Next up, I have two more units that I just kind of shoved next to each other, and that is, not Trek, sorry buddy, Tate and Thani. No wait, it's not Tate, right? It's something else. Oh, I can't remember. I always use this weird patch that like has all the names wrong. But yeah, so I have these two in mid B. I've written kind of low B. I've talked before about how I don't really like early Pegasus Knights that much. Obviously I love Vanessa, but kind of like Rucker, I think she's unique in the context of Sacred Stones. I don't like Florian and Fiora very much, and I don't like these two very much. Tate does get hard mode bonuses, and I don't think it's super difficult to train her, but Melody's going to be using your Delphi shields, so I guess if Melody dies, she can be more useful. I do still think she can be a useful unit, but yeah, they're just... effective damage in this game is really high. Thani, I think, has some utility, but every time I train her, she just winds up being so weak. Her HP is just so low, like, she's just so frail, and yeah, the second that she's near a bow or a ballista, and there are a decent amount of ballistas in this game, she's just gonna die. So I don't like these two that much. I do think they can be useful, as I said, but not the biggest fan. I have them, as I said, in kind of low B. And then a couple more characters in B. We have we'll find him. It's Dion, if I can there he is. So this is another character that if you don't want to go to Sakai and are factoring that into rankings, perhaps he's lower, but again, I'm trying not to do that. And if I don't, I think Dion is actually really strong. He's recruited really late, and I don't think has as much utility as Nime and Yodel, which is why he's lower. But this is another bow user. He's got really strong bases, really good against wyverns in that last couple of chapters after you recruit him. Again, maybe he should be lower because his recruitment time is just so late, but he's really useful right after you get him. So I like him quite a bit. As I said, I like Nomad Troopers in this game. I always get some combat out of him. So I think he's worth being in B. And then finally I have Lilina. So I played around quite a bit with her as far as like where I wanted her to be. And the thing is, I don't know if I'm being, what do you call it, if I'm like going against myself by doing this, but I have her MB, which might be higher than you'd think. And the thing is, I don't like Lilina very much. I train her quite a bit, or sorry, when I do train her, she really struggles. She's ridiculously frail, way more frail than Lou. I shouldn't say way more frail than Lou. Her magic is insane. She's more like Lute. Her magic is really strong, but her speed really struggles. She needs to get that speed. Now, I have found that she almost always does get to the point where her speed is strong enough to double. And once she gets to that point, she's ridiculous. And the reason that I still have her in B, even though she's recruited a lot later, she's more frail, she struggles with the speed, everything I just mentioned, is just because, again, the ability to point and click as you progress through the game, the ability to just annihilate wyverns is so nice. So nice. So I still have her in B because I think if Lou dies, you still want that, and I think Lilina can provide that. Also, I didn't really know if I was going to factor this in or not, but on the first chapter, where you get the member card, and there's a secret shop, you can buy angelic robes for relatively cheap. You could buy a shit ton of them. It kind of breaks the game, and with both Lilina and Lou, their frailty problems, especially with Lilina, can kind of be solved by just giving them multiple angelic robes at that point. I didn't know if I wanted to factor this in. Even if I'm not, I still think I like Lilina and B because I still think she can be quite nice. I just love mages in this game. And the thing is, you don't get a sage like Pen. So, I say I love mages. The last mage is going to be really low. But, alright, enough talking about Lilina. Again, I'm a bit unsure about her, but... So, now we're moving down to C. So C are going to be characters that I think have something wrong with them, so they only give you like combat for a small portion of the game, or require a decent amount of investment by you to be good. So let's get started on C. First we have Douglas. So Douglas is a general that you get not too late in the game, and I like Douglas. I think I wind up deploying him a decent amount of the time. I do think his low skill, and especially if you're trying to use axes with him, means that he's gonna miss most of his attacks. But if he does hit, he hits really hard, and his high defense and HP allow him to take hits really well. He's just one of those units that after I recruit him, I just deploy him for at least a handful of chapters, and he's just nice to have around. So it's hard for me to put him higher than C because, you know, his combat is pretty bad offensively, but it's hard for me to put him lower because he's just so bulky. Then I have Bartrey for kind of similar reasons. I'm just going to put her right here. No, not up there. Echidna. These are all kind of the same thing. I think Echidna is quite a bit worse than both these other units, but still, yeah. Bartrey, pretty solid bulk with his high HP. He can hit pretty hard. Also, the ability to use bows is really nice in this game. And then Echidna, unfortunately, her low constitution means that using axes is really hard with her, but she can use swords, and her high speed does kind of make up for that. So, yeah, just all decent combat. Only for, you know, a little portion of the game after they're recruited. But honestly, with Bartrey and his high strength, even bows in the late game can still do decent, just like Client and Green. So maybe he should even be higher. I don't know. But yeah, I like all three of these units a decent amount. Next up, I have Gonzalez. So people, what I've found is that people love Gonzalez. Like, people in my chat are always telling me to use him. They're always talking about how good he is. Here's the thing. On paper, I think Gonzalez is ridiculous. He gets hard mode bonuses, and if you go to, I believe it's the A route, maybe it's the B route. If you go to one of the routes, he starts like level 5 or something with already like 50 health, high strength. His strength and speed growth rates are insane. He'll cap HP really fast. And if you told me that there's a unit that has good HP, good strength, and good speed, I'd be like, sign me up. I'm going to train him every single time. Problem, and it's a big one, other than his bulk, because despite that HP, his defense and resistance are pretty bad. But despite that, low skill axes in Fire Emblem 6 means that he will struggle so hard to actually hit things. And yes, his high crit as a berserker is sweet, but seriously, if you go Sakai, like, my man is gonna, like, have 0 hit against nomads with, like, hand axes and stuff. Like, he just won't be useful at all. And even going to Ilya, like, even with weapon triangle advantage against, you know, Falcon Knights and stuff, he'll still really struggle. So, to those people, I also love Gonzalez in a vacuum, but if you've ever tried to use him on hard mode, especially in an Iron Man, you know, like, he's really inconsistent. Like, he is. It's just hard to find any kind of consistency with him. I mean, Gonzalez will have no more really than 50 hit for the entirety of the game, and that's just not very strong. So I do still really like him. You know, I think C is a character that you totally can train. But yeah, that's my spiel on Gonzalez. I think that he's a bit overrated, I think, in the community's mind. That's just my opinion. Next up, I have Zealot, another character that I've heard people be kind of high on. I don't really understand it. I don't hate Zealot. He's a slight upgrade to Marcus, but as I said before, Marcus is only really useful until the Western Isles, and while he can still be useful on the Western Isles, that's when characters like Rucker really take over, and that's when you recruit Zealot. So, again, he can be useful, but, you know, your other characters are really starting to come into their own at this point. Now, if those characters are struggling, or if you lose some of those, him and Marcus can still do a decent job on the Western Isles, especially at certain jobs, like getting different objectives, especially with this high movement. So I think he has utility, but I'm not in love with Zealot. I think he's just okay. Next up, I have Kath. I'm not going to talk about her too much. If you lose the other two thieves, she's probably higher than C for you. But yeah, she's recruited way later and has worse combat than Astal. So I don't really know what to say about her. She's not very good. Cyber and mid-C, you know, whatever. Next up, I have Fa. So jury's out for me when it comes to Fa. I'm still a little bit unsure about her. I used to think she was just this nothing unit that you could never do anything with, but on a recent playthrough, I actually found her to be quite useful. So one of the things that she can do, and I knew this, I just wasn't sure how to find utility with it, is she has incredible resistance. Like, she gets like plus 20 or something. And you can use her to basically, like, take Siege Tome hits, but you can do that with most characters just by healing them, so there's not a ton of utility in that. But what I found was that she has enough defense to take hits pretty well, and her strength, along with that Dragonstone, can actually allow her to do decent damage for a lot of the game, which is really useful. She's not Myrrh from Sacred Stones, far from it. The problem with her is that she doesn't quite have the growth of Myrrh, and she also doesn't have the hits. The Dragonstone, or the Divine Stone, I think it is, in this game only has 30 hits. So you don't get that much combat out of her, but she can take hits really well. And I believe, I don't know this for sure, but I think there's something with the AI that the AI will see her defense, but not the plus she gets from the Divine Stone. Now, I'm not 100% sure to the lengths you can go to manipulate this, but I was doing it a little bit on my last playthrough, and I think if you can manipulate it more, maybe she's even higher, and she should even be higher in a tier list. I don't know. So what I mean by this is, like, okay, so I was in Sakai, and these nomads who could have dealt damage to a lot of my different units all targeted Fa, and they could deal no damage to her. And I was like, that's weird. Why are they targeting her? And I think it's because they see her only having like 3 defense or whatever. So they go, well, we run one round her, and then they deal 0 damage. So I think if you play around with this a little bit and abuse it a bit more, she can actually be a really useful unit. So still a little bit unsure about her. Have her in C right now. Maybe belongs higher. I'm not sure. I think she's a really interesting character. Next up, I have Fur. So Fur's a character that we kind of meme on my stream, always put at the top of S, because I train her quite a bit, and Fur's actually quite a strong unit. She has hard mode bonuses like Rucker. She comes immediately able to deal pretty decent damage in the Western Isles, and the Western Isles are really, really nice to train sword users on. So she's got a lot going for her. The problem with Fur is that she's a Myrmidon, and even though I just explained some of the things that Myrmidons don't struggle with as much in this game, specifically with Rucker has a lot of things going for him that Fur doesn't. Specifically, the fact that he's probably going to be promoted by the time you're recruiting her, or close to it. The fact that he's dominating at that point. The fact that he's recruited quite a bit earlier. Fur has none of that going for her. And Swordmaster, while being a better class than it is in the other GBA games, is not a very good class. So, while it's fairly easy to train her and very doable, I don't think she's actually a very good unit, even though I train her quite a bit. Next up, I have Garrett. Garrett's another one of these just like pile of stats characters. He runs into the same problem that Gonzalez has, where despite having pretty decent looking stats, his hit rate is just dreadful. He's also recruited a bit too late for where his speed is. He'll get doubled very quickly, and that'll never really stop. And again, he's just not really capable of dealing much damage because he misses all the time. but he does still give you enough stats to be fairly useful for a little bit after you recruit him. So I think he's decent. Next up, we have Lot. So normally I'd kind of put axe users together because they're fairly similar, but I think Lot is way better than the other axe user in this game, and I think the other early fighter is terrible. Lot's an interesting character. I always kind of want to train him, but he just never winds up being very good. I do still kind of like him because he can give you that combat early on, but again, like, axes in this game, man, they're so bad. His skill is actually pretty good. The rest of his stats are okay, like he has good HP. He doesn't actually have that good of strength, he's a bit faster, and he has good defense. And honestly, that would make me kind of want to train him. I like that type of character. But man, axe hit rates, they're just so bad, and you really have to get consistently lucky to get kills for him, otherwise you're gonna fall behind. So I don't really like him that much. You know, a lot of these characters, like I said, him and Gonzalez, I think are really hurt by axes in this game. It's just unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Especially in Iron Man's. Having inconsistent hit on Iron Man's is just a great recipe to lose characters. So next up I have Zeus. Zeus is an interesting character. He's recruited fairly late for a pre-promote like he is. He comes with hard mode bonuses, so he actually comes with pretty strong looking stats, but his speed's a bit low, and I don't think his growth in speed is particularly high, so he'll never be quite the juggernaut that Milady is. Also, as I said, Flyers kind of struggle in this game by the fact that the Delphi Shield will likely be going to her. I don't hate Zeus, but he's a character that, kind of like Gonzalez, looks really good on paper, and then every time I use him, he just disappoints me. So, I don't know. I don't think he's spectacular, but you certainly can use him. Next up I have Noah. So Noah is a character that I don't like that much because, again, we're in a game where scaling is really important, and Noah's growths are quite bad, but his bases are not. And I think that even though the Western Isles, as I said before, aren't that hard, he can be pretty useful on them if you need that combat. So I don't like Noah that much, but he's a good class, and his bases are fairly strong. So I think he's okay to be in C. Next up I have Ray. Man, nobody maybe gets shafted more in this game than Ray. Because the way that hard mode bonuses work in this game, because Ray should get them. Ray is an enemy on the chapter that he's recruited. But for some reason, if you start on the chapter, you don't get hard mode bonuses. You have to, like, appear on the chapter after it starts, which is so weird. So that's why if you've ever played Percival on his first chapter, where he's just there from the beginning, has normal stats. But then when you can recruit him on the chapter, of course you shouldn't. So then when you should recruit him, which is a few chapters later, he's technically not there from the start, so he gets his hard mode bonuses. So Ray doesn't get hard mode bonuses. He's also... Dark magic is kind of like the axes of this game, where it has better attack, of course, but way worse hit. And Ray has, like... his bases aren't particularly strong, and yeah, dark magic hit rate is really weak. Flux is, like, kind of expensive and only has 30 uses. He just has a lot going wrong for him, and as much as I love druids, and I do, he's just always disappointing for me. He's, like, really frail too and slow. I don't like Ray very much. But, as I said, I really like magic users, and he can potentially offer you some decent combat. So. Next up I have Sue. I hate Sue. I trained Sue a lot. Like, a lot. So I feel like I know her pretty well. And man, is she a disappointment. I've talked about how much I love bows, and I do. And Sue is really fast, which is nice. But literally every stat other than speed and skill is ridiculously low. And that includes HP and defense and strength. And it's true that the effective damage is decent, but her strength is so low that unless you're using really strong bows, she won't even really be able to one-round wyverns at the end. She's so weak. I mean, doubling is nice, but yeah. I don't know, maybe she should be higher. She's just always so disappointing for me. I do think she's a good class, and I like bows quite a bit in this game. The ability to double is relevant, and the high speed is nice. Maybe she should be higher. Maybe I'm talking myself into being higher. In fact, I'm not sure why she's lower than... Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Sue should be higher. She's just always so disappointing for me. I'm not sure. I kind of want to maybe, like, put her at least up here. She's better than Fur, actually. Maybe there. Maybe there. I don't know. she is decent, and I do train her a lot, but I don't know. She's always disappointing with her frailty and her low strength. Next up we have Trek. So Trek is a character that actually does scale better than Noah, so he's kind of better in that regard, but neither of them are really like longevity units, especially with Lance and Alan already in the picture. Trek is a good class, obviously, and gives you okay combat when he's first recruited, but not very good. I do kind of like Trek, though, because he's actually kind of bulky, a little bit like Lowen from Fire Emblem 7. It's just that the low offensive stats of Lowen don't fly in this game like they did in Fire Emblem 7, so I don't think he's particularly strong, even though I do like him. Probably more than I should. And then I have Hugh. So, I have kind of a weird relationship with Hugh. So, like I said before, I don't like to factor in recruitment things for characters. I like to just talk about when they're recruited, their stats, their classes, things like that. But with Hugh, I do think it needs to be mentioned, because Hugh requires money of you in order to recruit him, and as you offer him less and less money, his stats become worse and worse. Now, on the chapter that you recruit Hugh, he comes with a member card, and that's where you buy the angelic robes I mentioned earlier. And buying Hugh is like depriving yourself of like 2 angelic robes when you're using the silver card, or something like that. And that's like 14 health you can distribute among your units. That's just so much. And while I do like mages quite a bit in this game, Hugh is just kind of a mediocre one that's recruited quite a bit later than Lelina and especially Lou. So, should he be a bit higher? Perhaps, but I kill him almost on every playthrough. So, for me personally, he's that low. But maybe at some point I'll try to play through where I actually use him. I think he can be okay. But I still don't like him as much as Lou and Lelina for sure. Okay, so that's all my C. Now we're going to be moving on down to D. So D are characters that really suck. Not quite as bad as the meme class, which obviously we'll get to, but characters that really have very minimal utility. They do have enough utility to not be useless, which I think is what the meme class is, but... So here we'll start with Juno. Juno just sucks. Or is it Juno? I think it's Juno. Juno just sucks. She's a Falcon Knight. As I said, I already don't like flyers very much in this game. And yeah, her offensive ability is just terrible. She's extremely frail. The only utility that she has is flying. And while there's some funky strats you can do on the Murdoch chapter with flying over mountains and avoiding reinforcement spawns, that's pretty gimmicky. And yeah, her offense, her combat is just terrible. She's recruited super late. So she's like the opposite of Dion, because they're recruited at the same time, but Dion gives actually really strong combat for when he's recruited. Just recruited a bit late. She gives nothing, so... But I do still think the flying utility is something, so I have her at the top. Next up I have OJ, a character that I actually trained quite a bit, and I actually did have a playthrough where I lost almost everybody, but somehow I got through Chapter 7, and I actually used him extensively on the Western Isles, and he actually wound up being a pretty darn strong hero and really useful for sort of bridging me to the Melody and Percival and those chapters. So I do think that he can be good. It's just the reason I have him in D as opposed to C is that I think everyone in C can at least give some combat right off the bat. Or it's like Sue, where she can't really, but she can actually grow into a fairly strong unit, or like Fur. OJ gives like such shit combat immediately. The only good thing about OJ early on is that he comes as an armor slayer, which he's useless with, but is quite nice. It's just those early levels, like, and the last time I trained OJ as well, he was really disappointing. Way worse than the previous time, so, yeah, I don't like him that much. He does have good skill, which is nice to pair with the axes, even though axes is sort of pretty bad in this game. But, yeah, I don't like OJ that much. You train him more than I should. Next up I have Geese, a character that if you've ever seen my stream, I complain about quite a bit. I think Geese is unfortunate because he's recruited at the same time as Gonzalez, and Gonzalez is so much stronger. Geese just really has nothing going for him, other than the fact that he can use a Brave Vax immediately, which is kind of cool. I actually did finally train him on my last playthrough, and he was an okay Berserker, but yeah, considering you get him around the same time as Gonzalez, and he has all the same issues with the axe hit rates, I just think he's terrible. I do think that he's better than some of the other units I'll talk about, just because he can give you a little bit of combat right off the bat, as soon as you recruit him. But yeah, he's just so weak with that hit rate. And his stats aren't very good. Next up, I have Ward, the other fighter. As I said, I put him quite a bit lower. Ward is terrible. So Ward has all the same issues that I mentioned with axe users, except that Ward comes with like 3 speed or something, which in this game you can't do. I mean, he gets doubled like by, I think, a mercenary in the level that you recruit him, and then on the next chapter is like immediately getting doubled by all of the cavaliers. Like, he does have enough HP to survive rounds of combat early on because he has like base 30, but he'll never hit anything because his skill is terrible and axes are terrible. And even if he does, he'll never double, and he'll get doubled. So I hate Ward. Again, I still have him in D because he can offer a little bit of combat, and again, can survive rounds of combat, but yeah, he's pretty terrible. Next up, I have the 2 archers. Yeah, like I said, bows are a bit stronger. I don't know, why does Dorothy's sprite like cut off a bit? Does this look weird? Everyone else's sprite is like normal, but Dorothy's is like big and awkward. Whatever. So I mentioned that I think bows are stronger in this game than they are in the other 2 GBA games, and I stand by that, but the archers still suck. I mean, still being bow locked is terrible. You also get like Klein and Shin and stuff early, so it's not like you desperately need bow utility. They can help you fight wyverns in Chapter 7, but Stu's there for that too, and so you don't need them. Yeah, they're really, I don't think they're really any better than they are in the other GBA games, even though I think bows are, if that makes sense. I still have them quite well. And then finally, I have the 2 knights you get early on. Knights are awful in this game. You get doubled by everything. Everything hits hard. There's armor slayers galore early on, just a ton of them. Also, they both suck. Like, boars for a knight... Sorry, I'm getting stuffed up. Boars for a knight actually does not have very good HP or defense. And like I said, he gets doubled very quickly, so he kind of sucks. And Barth, you know, has better defense and HP, but I think his base HP is like 25. It's really low for the level that he is. So again, not in meme because they can offer slight combat. They're recruited really early, but I think they're both pretty terrible. In fact, it maybe shouldn't be like that because Boris is recruited so early, but they're both terrible. All right, so now we're gonna move on down to meme. So meme are characters. Well, 2 of these I actually don't think are that bad, but they're memes for a variety of reasons, and then 3 of them are just garbage. The 3 worst characters in the game. So first we're gonna do Roy. So Roy I have in meme only because there was a tier list that I looked at once where this guy was convinced that Roy should be an S because of like supports and something else. I don't know, very strange. I think Roy should actually probably be in at least D because I think he's actually okay. The rapier gives you some nice utility early on, and you know, he's early stats. It's hard to say that anyone that gives early stats should be anything lower than D at the very least. So I do think he should be in D, but for me, he's a meme for that reason. So I have him down in meme. Next up, I have Merlinus. I actually think Merlinus is a really strong unit. I just think he's a meme unit because he's so weird. So he's a transporter, whatever the hell that means. Basically, he gives you access to your convoy if you deploy him. And unlike Fire Emblem 7, where he's also amazing, you actually have to deploy him. So he does take a deployment slot, which is unfortunate, but he's immortal. He keeps coming back. So not only is the ability to have access to your convoy on a chapter pretty useful, but also the ability to just have a free unit when you need to sacrifice a unit is so strong. Where I think he actually belongs, I have no idea. Maybe an A? I don't know. It's really nice utility, kind of like Fa. Like, you gotta think outside of the box with some of these characters, but I think because he's just such a weird unit and he keeps dying over and over again, I can't put him anywhere except for meme. But there are a lot of ways to get a lot of utility out of him. Next up, I have Corel. I kind of wanted to put Corel at the end, but honestly, the order of these last 3 is kind of irrelevant, and I think it's hard to put. Like, these 2 should be the worst characters in the game, right? I think we can agree on that. Corel is terrible, though. He's almost not a character. Like, Corel should almost just, like, not be on the tier list, if we're being honest. Like, so he's recruited on the, like, 2nd to last chapter. I guess technically the 3rd to last chapter, because there's, like, the epilogue, or the endgame thing. Yeah, he's a Swordmaster, which, as I said, is a terrible class. His stats are really high, but, again, like, he's just nothing. I mean, we're talking about, like, Yodel and Nime. They're recruited really late, but he's so late. Again, practically not a character in the game. Like, he's just He's so bad. And yeah, and I do think he belongs in meme though, because he is kind of a meme character, you know, with his really high stats, and for some reason he's like level 19 with like over 100 growths in areas, which is like so weird. I don't know. He's pretty whatever. All right, and then we have the two worst characters in this game. I think they definitely belong, and that is, I think 100% Sophia is better than Wendy. Sorry, but yeah, these two are terrible. So Sophia is a really low level, a level 1 shaman that you get in Arcadia, which is relatively deep in the game. I mean, you just got Melody, so the difference there is pretty stark. And you've already had Ray for a while. Ray's stronger, and I already talked about how much I don't like him. Now, yeah, I don't know. I was gonna mention that I had a playthrough where I actually did train her quite a bit, and she was Apocalypse killing Manicheets on the last chapter, and that was cool. But honestly, that sheds her in a much better light than she should. Yeah, dark magic is terrible in this game. Her base stats are absolutely atrocious. She'll die to anything and everything. It's really hard to hit. I mean, she's not... You know, I talked about Gonzalez not having better than like 50 hit for the whole game. She's never gonna have better than like 40 hit. Maybe eventually, but it's so hard to train her. I do still think she's way better than Melody, or I keep saying Melody, Wendy, just because if she does hit with that like 40%, she actually can hit pretty hard immediately. I don't think that should make her any higher than here, but... And then we have the worst character in the game. I think it's really hard to say anyone else is worse than Wendy. Wendy is absolutely atrocious. She's got like Boars. She's like, I think got slightly worse stats than Boars, and she's recruited like 7 levels later. There's just, you can do nothing with Wendy. You know, her growths are like okay. If you do put in a ton of time, she can be, I think, an okay general, but yeah, she just combines all these terrible things. Her bases are absolutely atrocious. Her growth rates are like only okay. And she's an atrocious class. It's so hard to train at night. So it's really hard to put Wendy anywhere except for the lowest of the low. I think she's the worst character in the game. By quite a margin. In fact, if you want to make your own Wendy tier just underneath meme, then, you know, feel free. Because I think she's terrible. And that concludes our list. Yeah, just like any other tier lists, if you found this interesting or you disagree on any points, you know, feel free to comment. I'm always interested in talking about this. Again, I think this one especially, because there's so many units, is more just a discussion about the specific units rather than like exactly where they should be. Like, do you think that Gonzalez should be here or here? You know, I don't know. I think it's more just the discussion of Gonzalez. So. But yeah, I enjoyed making this as all the other tier lists, and thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.